Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. Games Watch have very kindly sent me some new Empire miniatures to have a look at and paint and work on. In this video, I'll show you how I painted General Hans von Lowenhacke. Out of all the new miniatures for the Empire of Man range, this one probably got a little bit more criticism online than the others. I still like this miniature. It's not my favourite out of the new releases. I really love the Battle Wizard, and that's coming up probably in the next video after this one. But I really love the character of Hans von Lowenhacke. I love his rules, and I love the way he works within the Nuln army, bringing in mercenaries, and that got me more excited in some ways than the miniature. But now I have the miniature in hand, I'm really looking forward to getting some paint on it. Now, if you'd like my thoughts on the miniature before I paint it, the building of it, the quality of the resin and all that, look out for a series of shorts, 3-minute shorts, coming on the channel soon. The unboxing for this one will be out the very next day after release. If you're watching this on release day, then look out for it very, very soon, and I'll pop a link in at some point. But here he is, assembled and all primed black, ready to get to work. I want to give this miniature really good quality zenithal base layer. So we've got Dungeon Stone Grey from Tooth and Coats, and then White from Vallejo, both through the airbrush, both very much zenithal. So I'm mostly going top down on the miniature, though a zenithal really means one single light source, and we're not doing that here. We're moving the miniature around. I'll come in from the sides as well, and I'm trying to turn it into a grayscale. So if you turn the miniature upside down, you can see all the black into the undercuts, but I'm really trying to build up a nice surface to paint on. And when I apply thin layers of paint, the shadows and things show through a little bit. It really helps you know where to put the paint, but also really builds that contrast in later on. The second stage of this zenithal underpaint is white here, and most of my videos you'll see me just doing white rather than the grey as well, but I'm taking my time a little bit more here, really trying to build up a decent quality underpaint with smoother transitions between the grey to the white. So I've got this really nice looking surface to paint on, which is a little bit more reflective of a character miniature like this. If you watch a lot of my videos before, you'll have seen this stage as well. I like to dry brush the miniature on top of the zenithal underpaint that I do with the airbrush, just to really pick out the detail. But really taking most of the paint off here. I really want to just catch that detail. I don't want any streaking across the flat surfaces. I'm putting so little on, you can hardly see it at some points, but it just really picks out things like the feathers here, and it'll really help me with the way I paint them later on, get to that detail and just make things pop a little bit more. Going to start with a tiny little window box bit of flesh that is his eyes and nose, and we've got Gilliman flesh, Shige purple and Vulpus pink. The reason I'm using all contrast for this is because it's such a small area of skin that the Gilliman flesh over zenithal gives a really nice looking finish as it is. And what happens afterwards is I go back in with that Shige purple into the eye sockets around the edge of the faceplate of the armour, and then again after that, using that Vulpus pink, that warmer tone, I'm adding it over his nose and over the cheeks a little bit as well, just the smallest amounts, but you get a bit of a nice multi-tone flesh finish. This is Elven Skin for Tooth and Coats. It's actually the top layer, the highlight layer of a triad. I'm just using this to reinforce now that I've added those contrast paint glazes over that zenithal, just picking out the tops of the cheekbones and a little bit on the nose as well, just to make them pop and stand out a little bit. Now just finishing off the face with the eyes, so a little bit of black, white, and then black again in dots in the eyes. And I usually do this just before I do that little final touch-up highlight with the flesh. I did it out of order this time around, but I've still got the flesh on my palette should I make any mistakes and I need to tidy up. This is Skeleton Horde and contrast medium as well, 50-50 on my wet palette. And Skeleton Horde is already quite low in pigment anyway, and I really want to make use of this nice white layer and just kind of tint this almost. I want this to look like a sort of a creamy off-white rather than too dark here. I want to make use of that zenithal as much as I can. So I've got a really nice smooth blend there with the airbrush. So I want to keep that there. I want that to show off through the paint and do a lot of the heavy lifting for me. So I'm glazing it on very thin. I'm not slopping this on. I'm almost painting this thinly on to try and tint it and tone it, and I'll build it up in layers until I get to the required sort of darkness in those recesses. Then as a second layer, I'm just adding a little bit more skeleton horde back in, and then deliberately going into the recesses more, glazing it in, darkening it up. I'm trying to do this little bit by little bit. If I go on too heavy, get tide marks on there, I'll have to go back and do more highlighting later on. So I'm almost working in reverse. So I've added that zenithal first, but a really smooth finish, and I'm going in and adding the shadows now, but trying my best to keep it nice and smooth so I don't need to do too much later on. By the end, I'm just using skeleton horde straight from the pot, just in the darkest areas. I'm really just dabbing it in there. There's hardly anything on my brush, really just adding in those shadows and painting it in. And this is a little bit different to some of the other tutorials. You'll see me slap this on here and there. I didn't really know how I was going to paint this miniature. I had an idea in my head, and this is more of me sort of explaining how I went about it rather than it being a pure tutorial, so to speak. So this is Contrast Nasdrag Yellow, and I've chosen to use this for his moustaches and his eyebrows. I think it's black on the studio paint job, and for me in the artwork as well, it looks quite light. But this guy, mercenary captain, mercenary commander that travels around the Empire for hire, and for some reason I got in my head that he's like Flashheart from Blackadder, and many of you won't get that reference, but I quite like the idea of it being a slightly comical character with his big comical flashy uniform, and that's where I'm going with this. Now turning to a different yellow, this is Iandan yellow from Citadel Contrast. He's got 3 feathers on the back of his helmet. He's obviously working from Nuln, so I want a black feather. I want a red feather as well. But he comes from Talabek land, and I thought it'd be really nice for the 3rd feather to be yellow. So it almost works with the red feather, which will be next, to represent his home state, his home province, as well as working as a mercenary for Nuln at this time. That's why I went for the yellow. It also will really stand out and be quite striking. So this is Yellow Flame and Ivory Tusk from Tooth and Coat, and if you're using Citadel, we're looking at Flash, Gitch Yellow and Pallid Witch Flesh. I'm going to be using those just to add the highlights on those moustaches and the eyebrows, and they're quite prominent in the detail. You can see the big thick strands of hair, so it was very much a case of the yellow first and then a 50-50 mix of both that and the Ivory Tusk to go back and add a slightly thinner line. And then we have layer Phalanx Yellow and Ivory Tusk, slightly brighter yellow to go with the slightly brighter yellow on the feather. And again, it was a case of doing some thin lines, trying to stick with the detail, sometimes turning my brush on the side to pick out and brighten up some strands of the feather, and then a 50-50 mix, and then after that just the tops or the very ends of the feather, almost pure white. So now it's time for that second feather, and this is Blood Angel's red contrast colour, beautiful rich red, and goes beautifully over this zenithal prime and all the dry brushing we've done. As soon as you put that base layer over, you can already see that detail coming through, which is exactly what you want, and that rich red running down into those recesses, really making base coating a bit of a dream. But he's also the spot colour on this miniature as well. So he's got a red sash, which I'm picking out in the same colour. And there's also a trim around his other clothing, around the edge of his big cape here that I'm picking out in red. And what is some script on the hammer on the studio paint job, I've decided to make this more sort of Nuln colours. He's wearing his Nuln colours in terms of a couple of little things flying from his hammer, and then the shield on his breast. Other than that, it's his own clothing. So this is Sanguine Scarlet and Demon Red. So we're looking at Mephiston Red and Evil Sun Scarlet. I think they're the closest in terms of Citadel paints if you're looking for that conversion. And we're just highlighting those red layers we've already put down. So the Blood Angel's red contrast paint runs into all those recesses, gives a dark enough base tone. So I'm really just working with the detail on the miniature here. So those raised areas of fabric, we get a fairly substantial first layer of paint, leaving all the dark in the recesses, and then we move on to that brighter colour, and it's just thinner levels traditional layering highlighting here, very thin on the sharp edges of the cape and things like that. So we're using the side of a brush, but nothing too taxing here. It's a character miniature, but I'm still doing it as army painting. This isn't really for display. By the time I get to the feather, it's the same method as I did with the yellow one. So I'm just trying to focus on the details a little bit. Sometimes using the side of my brush, not trying to cover every single strand of those feathers, focusing where the light is hitting them a little bit more, and then moving up to that lighter tone, focusing towards the ends of those strands. Very much sticking with the contrast, we have Black Legion, Basilicanium Grey and Apothecary White. I'm starting off with just painting in that shield a nice smooth black. We'll come back and highlight that afterwards. But the main reason I've got all those three paints and they're on my wet palette so that they're thinned very slightly is I'm going to wet blend them on this area of fur here. I like the idea that it's a mixture of black, grey blending out to white. Maybe it's a wolf pelt or something like that. So I'm starting with the darker colour, keeping it thin, adding a little bit of water sometimes to blend it out, then adding the next colour while it's still wet. So I'm wet blending those two layers together, and then we go into the Apothecary White, which of course blends into the Basilicanium Grey, giving you a lighter grey effect. Exactly the same method on this top feather as well. So while I want it black to represent Nuln next to the red, I also want it to look a bit more like a realistic feather. God knows where they're getting these feathers from, what kind of birds, and maybe they're dyed. That's where you get the colours, but the size of them as well. They've got to be eagle feathers or something. But again, blending them in, different colour at a time, and it will end much more of a sort of a whitish grey at the tip. A nice little simple leather recipe I use all the time. So Cygor brown contrast paint, and then we've got the boar hide and fur cloak, which is the same as Dunbar brown or Tuscarora fur, or thereabouts. So the contrast is the base layer, and you also always get that slight highlight built in anyway because of that underpainting. And where it's a little bit lighter, it's kind of showing you where you need to add those first highlights on, which is pretty simple. And I've gone the same colour on all of the leather areas. So we've got the grips on the handles. We're going to go with his gloves. We've got the scabbard of his sword and any belts and little straps as well. And I quite like the idea that this is really expensive leather. It's a full set that he's paid to have made. That's why it matches his gloves and his pommel and the handles on his knives and swords, etc. So it's all one colour. Much like all the other colours, we're following simple layering techniques. So once that base layer of the contrast is dry, I'm coming in with those other colours. And if you've seen it on other tutorials, I know it looks quite red when it first goes on, but it tones down as it dries. So slightly thicker highlights to start with. When we get to that top highlight, it's quite pinkish, so you don't want to make those lines too thick. You want it to look like the stressed leather areas along the edges, across the knuckles of his hand, on where his gloves are, that kind of thing. You don't really want to overly brighten the whole area by going in too thick. So nice thin tip on your brush, just picking out a few little dots for that final layer. Then we have Wizard Grey and Carcharodon Grey, so you're looking at Dawnstone, and Administratum Grey if you're using Citadel, and then a white on top. I probably wouldn't use a Citadel white if I was you. And what we're doing now is we're returning to the cloak there, the fur area, the fur pelt part of the cloak. Now that that's fully dry, all those contrast areas are dry, I'm just picking out highlights on those strands. So we've got the darker greys over the black. As we move to that mid-tone grey, we're using the lighter grey, and as we get to that really light, almost white area, we're using the white, and it's as simple as that, just working our way over that fur area and picking out the highlights. With the white at the end as well, you still want to go and pick at the end of some strands of fur, even on those darker areas, just adds a lot more depth to it. And then again, a bit of a rinse and repeat here, but those same colours and same methods on the feather as well, because we've used those same base colours. This is Death Reaper and Dungeon Stone Grey, so Corvus Black and Mechanica Stena Grey if you're using Citadel. I'm just highlighting that shield now, because it was a flattish black before. So I'm just highlighting towards the bottom, focusing on that little crease in the centre as well. Obviously the light would tend to hit the top, but I like to kind of reverse it a little bit. It looks quite nice. You do a thin layer along the top of highlight, and then you focus a little bit more light towards the bottom, and it is just slightly angled up, and it gives quite a nice effect, but it's very subtle. So we're back to that light sort of creamish clothing it has. It's a skeleton horde, ivory tusk and trooper white. So you're looking at pallid witch flesh or Corax white if you are sticking with the citadel whites. And first of all, I've actually mixed the skeleton horde in with the ivory tusk, about 50-50. So it's thinned it for me already, and it's added some of that colour that we're using in the base layer that we gently glazed on this afterwards. But I really am just focusing right on the edges, on where the puffs on those sleeves stand out. I don't really want to build anything up in the centre. I like the colour that's there already. I'm just trying to give it a bit of vibrancy and make it pop and stand out. So I'm being really subtle here with very thin paint. I don't want to see really stand out chalky white lines. If they are too thick, I'll be glazing them back again afterwards. And slowly we move into the trooper white on its own, but I'm being very careful here just to add little dotted lines rather than really solid marks here. And even then at times I go a little bit too far and I have to glaze them back down again, but the overall finished effect at the end comes out quite nice. So this is Doom Metal Dwarven Iron Plate Armor Mithril Blade, and I don't have all the conversions for Citadel. I think some of these are from wave 3 of Two Thin Coats as well. I usually use different brands for metallics. I'm starting to use a little bit of Two Thin Coats, but I wanted to try something different. I couldn't get hold of all the paints I've been using so easily at the moment anyway, and I do love this range, so I thought I'd give the metallics a go. And this darkest shade here is almost black. It's the darkest black metallic I have. I use something funny enough called black metal a lot from Scale 75, and I love it. And this is even darker, but it's a really nice base layer. And I decided what I would do is cover all the rest of the miniature that we haven't already painted, so all the armor in this color as a base, even things that are going to be gold later on, because it's so dark and it does have a slight brown hint to it. It's a warmer tone. I didn't think it would matter, and it turns out it doesn't. So it just gives me almost turning a miniature back to black. If you're familiar with that process, the idea is you black something out again, meaning that if you do leave a little gap or something showing, you won't see it because it's dark and black. So I thought it would be a safe option to do. And what I'm doing now is just building up through those other 3 colours, layering almost the same way I have painted for the rest of the miniature. Quite often what happens with metallics and the way I painted them for years until more recently was you'd whack your flat metal colour down, stick a wash on it, paint that colour back in again, and then maybe go in with a brighter dry brush or highlight afterwards. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I just wanted to do something different here, and I wanted to use those metallic paints but to layer them up the same way as I would do if I was painting a non-metallic colour. I don't mean non-metallic metals either. I'm not quite doing that method here, but I'm just using standard highlighting methods here, so making sure that I'm leaving some of that really dark metallic in all of those recesses and slowly building up lighter and lighter, a little bit less each time, so you've got a bit of transition. You can see as we get to those top highlights now that it really starts to pop, and there's a bit of a transition there. There's still darker metal in the recesses, and you're very much doing edge highlighting at the final stages here. We are going to add some oil washes as well, so any little mistakes we can blend down a little bit, but I quite like this method, and these colours have worked really well. Sticking with all of these new metallic paints I've just bought, we have Ancient Gold and Dragon's Gold, and again I've been using Necro Gold and Elven Gold from Scale 75 for absolutely years now. I still love them. I don't know if these are any better, but I just wanted to try something different, and for those of you who watch a lot of my videos, this gives you insight into other colours rather than me just repeating the same things over and over again, which I am very aware of. You find something you like and you're comfortable with, but in terms of a teaching exercise, that's not always super useful. I'm putting a lot less gold on this miniature that's on the studio paint job. A lot of the edge of all the armour, the trim is gold. I wanted to nudge down the bling just a tiny little bit. I wanted to keep the metal plate areas metal, and almost like the gold bits are added on extra. So we're focusing on the headwear, of course. There's lots of gold here, but in terms of the shoulders, it's just that one main shoulder design on the shoulder pad. It's the main knee area rather than all of the edges on all of the armour. Now the brighter gold, the Dragon's Gold, is quite a different gold. It doesn't look like a normal progression from the other gold, which is really desaturated, but I wondered how it would work together just to focus on the raised areas, as if the gold underneath is slightly dirty and dishevelled, or at least old. He's had it for a while. And it worked quite well. I was all prepared to go back and have to repaint this bit, or maybe do a bit of a 50-50 mix here, but I just went for it. And while they are different golds, I don't know, it just looks like it's been handled quite a lot. Maybe this isn't all gold, maybe it's brass, maybe he's not quite as rich as he looks, and that's why he's traveling around working for all these different provinces. But it really starts to brighten up, look quite striking, and I quite like the effect of using those two slightly different golds together. I needed a final highlight, and I didn't have the right gold from this range, but I wanted to stick to them. So I've added some of this platinum crown into that dragon's gold, and it's quite desaturated like that first gold we used. And I think that works quite well. You've still got the warmth of that dragon's gold there, and it's still bright enough to highlight, but it looks a bit more like gold plating that's rubbing down to the brass, that kind of thing, which is I'm leaning into that idea now of that's what this is. I quite like the look of it, and it works really well. You've still got that sort of warmer mid gold there, but there is definitely an underlying, is this sort of polished brass or plated gold kind of effect. That's what it suits in my head anyway, but I think it works the way it looks. So this is already mixed oil wash, grease. It's quite a sepia tone, but with a slightly more brown undertone to it. And I'm just using this instead of a normal wash, using an old brush, because it is not water-based, it's an oil-based paint, so it will destroy your brushes. But other than that, I'm working it very much like I would a standard wash. The difference is it runs into the recesses a bit more, evaporates, doesn't leave any tide marks, and you can tidy it up a little bit afterwards. So I just love to use this on my miniatures, and I love to use it on my metals. After it's fully dry, which can take 24 hours or so, I blasted it with a hairdryer to speed it up a little bit. I'm just using some artist thinner on that same brush. I've cleaned it off, just a little bit on the end of the brush, and anywhere that oil paint has left a surface looking a little bit dull, I can just take it back off again, which is really a nice thing to do. So it takes it almost completely away again, leaving it in the recesses, which is adding some really nice shading and weathering effect to it, but without the sort of obliterating the colours and things that you have before. And once it dries, it looks really spot on. And it's finishing off the base now to match my army project, so I'm just brushing in some dry pigment and blowing the excess off really, but it just really changed the effect on the base. And I've got him standing on a door there. I really wanted to balance out, well, it's quite a top heavy miniature in terms of its design, and that was well documented when it was revealed. You could have gone with something even bigger. I thought about a cannon or something like that for him to stand on, and I think that would help as well, really have him standing out. But even just that small door there has helped lift him a little bit and add a little bit more weight to the miniature, so it doesn't seem so unbalanced. But adding some tufts, adding a little bit of flour, adding some mud effect there as well. Even a tiny touch just splattering up the back of that cloak. I don't want to go too far, but I do want a little bit on there because it's going to get dirty, and I do like my miniatures to look like they're in the real world. It's also really handy if you do make the odd little mistake, you can put a little bit of effect like that on and cover it over. And then I like to finish off my bases with a black rim. You do whatever you like to match your army. Before you know it, he's all done, but let's look at some proper pictures. Now, I really had fun doing this as it's part of my army, and I mentioned it just a moment ago, but I really think building up that base does help this miniature and its balance a little bit. I do like this miniature. It's not my favourite out of those that were released. I love that Battle Wizard and I love Harold Gemminson, but I still think it's pretty cool. But I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Keep it friendly. I know a few people didn't like this sculpt, but it's grown on me quite a lot, and I absolutely love the rules for him and love the character for him. And I'm pretty pleased with the way the paint jobs come out. I'm happy for this as a sort of a leading miniature in my army. Like I said, it's not a display miniature. I've done it in a few hours rather than spending days and days on it, so it's not fully refined. But as a gaming miniature, as the general of my army, I'm pretty happy with the way he's come out, and I'm looking forward to adding more and more to the project. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I had loads of fun painting this model. Mainly, I think it's because it's part of my Nuln army project that I'm working on at the moment. And I'll pop a link for the video all about the start of that and what I want to take to Warhammer Throne of Skulls. It's a fun video. I also talk about my list with Ed from Close Order. So if you haven't seen it already, it's well worth checking out.
Games which would very kindly send me a few of the new miniatures for Warhammer, the Old World, including Harold Gemmenson, that beautiful Knight Panther, and the 3 new wizards, of which one of them is also in my Nuln army. And if things go into plan, that will be the next painting video on the channel as well. Now, if you're watching this past pre-order weekend, well past their release, then those videos will hopefully already be on the channel, so go look for them. If you're watching this on pre-order weekend or close to it, then worth subscribing to the channel if you're not already, to make sure you don't miss out on those videos when they land. I have also recorded very small shorts, so 3-minute short videos of unboxings for each of those minis, where I put them together and you get to see it from all the different angles for those of you who like a little bit more information on them before you purchase them yourself, so do look out for those. If you'd like to support the channel, just commenting on this video, liking it really helps. But if you'd like to help me even further, do check out my affiliate links below and check out my Patreon, which is the best way you can support the channel. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.